Vielen Dank, Marion Hase, und vielen Dank an das Goethe-Institut generell dafür, diese Debattenreihe zu ermöglichen. I will now switch to English, as this will be this evening's main discussion with translation into Spanish. I would just like to recall that this is a series of debates in which we have already discussed before the summer European history, the question in which sense historical events and transformations are either a burden on the present or achievements on which one can further build. We have discussed the question in which way there is a Europeanization of society, that social bonds are strengthened beyond the national boundaries. And we have discussed the crisis as a challenge to European democracy. And we will move on tonight to discuss socio-economic matters. And maybe even more than in the other cases, it is rather self-evident what is at stake. Already from the 1960s onwards, which means less than 2 decades after the worst disaster in European history, European societies, European national societies, but also the emerging European Union were hailed as that region of the world in which the social question, a question that had arisen in the early mid-19th century, had been solved. And had been solved for good through a connection between market organization of the economy, liberal democratic politics, and the welfare state. And now we know, for some time now we know, that this achievement may have been less lasting than it looked in the 1960s, so that the question is open again, and it is a moment also to ask in what way it maybe had been answered in an incomplete, only temporary and less than satisfactory way. I will stop my introductory remarks here because our guest speakers have much more to say on this than I have. I just would like to continue the introduction with which Marion Hase has already begun and mention that Claus Offe is probably today the most eminent political sociologist in Germany. From the 1970s onwards, he has studied liberal democratic capitalist welfare societies in the light of the structural problems that they may generate and that may lead to tensions and contradictions within them. He has later on moved to look at the transformation in East European, formerly socialist societies, becoming liberal democrat and capitalist, and the issues that emerge there. And over the past 2 decades, maybe one can say, has considered in which way the European Union, the existence of the European Union, transforms that issue, provides elements of solutions, but new kinds of problems. In particular, with what I consider a path-breaking essay of some 15 years ago about the connection between capitalist market economies, liberal democratic polities, and social solidarity, the way in which these elements depend on each other or depended on each other in nationally constituted societies. And from then on, he has continued exploring this particular linkage. Bo Stråth, in turn, is a historian, a contemporary historian of the 19th and 20th centuries, who has never shied away from looking at the present, things historians normally don't do. We have had the pleasure of working together in Florence at the European University Institute for almost 10 years, looking at European modernity, the way in which a specific form of social political organization emerged in Europe, and what kinds of tensions emerged within that context. And Bo has more recently worked on reconsidering the 19th and 20th century history of Europe in the light of that particular question, the way in which European peace treaties, from the one in 1815, the Vienna Congress, to the one in 1918, the Treaty of Versailles, to the peace treaties after the Second World War, have first neglected the social question, even though one had considerable knowledge about it already already in 1815 and even more so in 1914, and in which way this was meant to be remedied exactly by building welfare states after the Second World War, but where even this third peace arrangement comes to its limits. That is work in progress Bo is now pursuing. So I'm telling you this to say that we have the greatest amount and quality of expertise on the matter that we can have here this evening. And with that, I pass the word on to Claus Offe.
Okay. So thank you very much for your kind introduction and also for inviting me to this panel. We are two speakers from what is often referred to as the minority of EU member states, to which Finland and Germany belong, that have actually successfully coped with the crisis, as opposed to those who have not. The terminology of center versus periphery is widely used today, and we all know, as consumers of media reporting, who belongs to the center, namely a smaller group of countries, Germany, Austria, Finland, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark, who have partly not been affected by the crisis and or managed to cope with the crisis in relatively favorable ways. And then a larger group of countries that are referred to the periphery. And one German economist who is not particularly friendly to European affairs coined the artificial word gypsic, referring gypsies, referring to Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Cyprus, and Slovenia, the indebted countries. And Europe gets more and more controversial in this real polarization, not just in the sense of a fragmentation. A third group of countries, of course, includes the new member states, a minority of which have adopted the euro, such as Slovenia, Slovakia, and Estonia, and Latvia coming soon. So Europe has been at the center of heated debates in all of the member states, and the future of Europe is more controversial. And integration has less support than it used to have, and we'll see, and some people anticipate with nervousness, what happens in the European elections that take place in May, I think, 2014, less than a year from now. To bring a little bit of order into the controversy, I would like to use one of the simplistic social science 2x2 matrices, where you have right versus left in the horizontal dimension, and more integration versus return to the nation state in the vertical dimension. And then you can look at the left integrationist. And these are the people who think that Europe can eventually become a democratic project, which it currently is not. It is not a state, it is not a democracy. It should become something of both, a new kind of political entity which is democratic, that is based upon some consent, some legitimation, coming from European citizens who at the same time are citizens of nation states. They have this dual identity, and we need to develop a Europe that can make decisions like a state can, and can base these decisions not on technocratic modes of decision making, but upon the democratic legitimation. These are the European leftists, the pro-integration leftists, of which I think Habermas is, at least in Germany, one of the representative names who have developed a constitutional theory. We see what the German Constitutional Court thinks about this, but this is one of the four positions that I want to distinguish. The second is the market liberal right pro-integrationist. They think that the euro is a fabulous invention because it promotes division of labor and trade between EU member states. It intensifies competition. It overcomes what is in the market liberal discourse called rigidities that stand in the way of market competition. And they, proponents of this position, the market liberal right pro-integration, the promoters or proponents of this position argue that Europe is a machinery of liberalization, of trade liberalization and division of labor. Once you have the euro, then you can promote growth. We don't see it at the moment, but that is the vision. Then you have a small minority of people who say that a leftist project of European democracy and European governance is hopeless, given the strengths of the market liberal integrationist liberalizers, that we have to return to the institutions of the nation state. And at present in the German debate, but also soon in the international debate, one proponent of the leftist proponents of the nation state is the German sociologist Wolfgang Stråth. And finally, of course, you have a loud and growing and large camp of political forces which belong to the right, namely the nationalist right, advocating the return to the nation state. These are anti-European, often anti-liberal and anti-democratic populist parties that in many European countries play a role. So these four boxes that I have distinguished in this little cross tabulation are unevenly filled with political forces. And the most original and the most minoritarian, but who knows, perhaps with the potential to grow, is the one of leftist anti-integrationist. They argue Europe is a neoliberal model of market integration. If we want a fair distribution and a fair representation of social classes and political forces, then we have to return to the nation state because Europe does not provide us with this. So let me introduce another distinction, and you tell me when I should stop. A distinction that starts with one acronym in English, and the acronym that I want to discuss briefly is the acronym ESM. ESM means two things, and what I'm trying to argue here is that these two things are diametrically opposed to each other. One is ESM stands for the European social model. And the European social model is a vision that was endorsed and advocated throughout the history of the European Union, beginning with the Treaties of Rome, which combines three things as a model of a fair and just society. It combines the emphasis on economic growth, leading to full employment. It secondly emphasizes social protection, social inclusion, and the improvement, as the treaties say, Lisbon Treaty said, the improvement of working conditions. So fairness at the workplace. And thirdly, it emphasizes democracy. And not just democracy as a form of equal voting rights and political party competition, but also democracy as industrial democracy, representation of workers at the workplace. So this is one reading of the ESM acronym. The other is European Stability Mechanism. And that has been adopted over the past few years as a response to the triple crisis that Europe finds itself in. First, the banking crisis or the financial market crisis, leading to a fiscal crisis or a public debt or sovereign debt crisis, which in turn leads to a crisis of European institutions. European institutions such as the European Central Bank, but also the European Commission and not least the European Court of Justice, have to step in order to perform emergency operations to stabilize the conditions without having any kind of democratic mandate to do so. And this is all caused by the euro. The introduction of the euro, all experts, without exception, I've read that foreign experts such as Milton Friedman on the one hand and Paul Krugman on the other, the entire spectrum of economic doctrines warned that the euro is not a good idea in a highly heterogeneous currency zone. The GDP, the social policy arrangements, the economic culture, the institutions differ so widely among the members of the Eurozone that it is highly unlikely, they said throughout the 80s and 90s, without exception, highly unlikely that this is going to work. And I think there is a wide consensus today that the introduction of the euro in this wide Eurozone, in this currency area, was a serious mistake. However, the seriousness of the mistake is underlined by the fact, also widely acknowledged and understood, that returning to the pre-euro situation of national currencies and national monetary sovereignty would be an even greater mistake. So we have the rare kind of mistakes that you cannot easily undo without inflicting serious harm upon yourself. We are trapped in the euro, although we have reasons to understand that the euro was not a good idea. We need to cope with the present situation in constructive ways. The argument for the euro is, of course, it promotes competition and division of labor in the currency zone. the argument against the euro is it works as a fetter, as a constraint, as a mechanism that ties the hands because devaluation of national currencies is no longer possible. As you cannot engage in external devaluation, you have to rely on what is now widely called internal devaluation. And that is a nice term for saying the wages must go down and public services must go down. The health system, the education system must be put under an iron regime of austerity, an austerity regime that is not only not based upon democratic legitimation, but it destroys national democracies. So the household in the periphery countries is dictated by someone who is called Troika and who has never been elected. The key rights of democratic parliaments, namely the right to decide on a budget, is destroyed in the process. Some people have referred to this as government by not the people, but government by memorandum. That is an imposed contract designed by the Troika, and it affects wage formation, wage determination in the member states with gruesome consequences, both in terms of wages and in terms of employment. We call this austerity policy that has been imposed in response to the first financial market and then sovereign debt crisis. And it is also, I'm happy to report, widely shared today, the point of view that austerity policy that is cutting expenditures it has been a disaster, which makes the problem worse rather than works as a cure. It has been recognized belatedly, and this belatedness requires a understanding by itself. It has been recognized belatedly by the IMF that austerity is a disaster. The simple insight being that if you cut government expenditures by 1%, the impact on the economy will be a shrinking of growth by 1.6%. A negative multiplier, as the technical term is, of 1.6. 1%, and you never can improve the debt situation, that is the ratio of government indebtedness or state indebtedness to GDP by unleashing such a negative economic effect. That is widely understood. Part of the situation, and I come to social policy at this point, is that Europe or European institutions or an alliance of European institutions such as the so-called Troika forces member states to reduce wages in the process of internal as opposed to external devaluation, right? And nominally, the treaties describe fiscal and in particular social policy as nominally exempt from EU level policy. The EU says, the Commission says, the Parliament says, we have nothing to do. You do your own thing in terms of pensions, in terms of health, in terms of unemployment, in terms of labor market, in terms of family policy, the major parts of social policy. However, this nominal autonomy of member states to do their own thing is severely, gravely subverted by the fact that the budget for social expenditures is dictated by their economic performance and the response to their economic performance coming from Brussels. The key variable here is the unit cost of labor. To give you one quantitative example, in order to balance the balance of international trade among Eurozone member states, it would be required that in order to reduce the German export surplus to zero, German products would have to be 20% more expensive in labor costs and more expensive in taxation. Whereas Greek products, in order to compensate for the Greek trade deficit, would have to be no less than 40% less expensive in order to make Greece competitive. They are all tied together under the regime of one currency, and they cannot adjust in any ways but cutting deficits by cutting social expenditures and wages, which are in part, as far as the public sector employment is concerned, literally dictated by European institutions, which in turn do not rely on democratic legitimation. To make a long story short, the obvious question is, what can we do in this situation? What can we do in order to maintain not only standards of social justice and social balances, whatever we mean by these terms, but also in order to win the support of the European citizens for the European Union and the continuation of the European process of integration. What can we possibly do? Should we give up and turn to the nationalists on the left or on the right, or are there ways out? One idea, and there are a number of ideas around, which require political resources of significant orders of magnitude. One possibility would be to harmonize taxes, both income taxes, corporate taxes, and value-added taxes, that is sales taxes, in Europe, which are widely differing now and which indicate the nature of EU member states as competition state, competing for investment, which supposedly creates employment. If there can be created an equal playing field, that would be helpful. So tax harmonization is something that will be on the agenda fairly soon. There should also, secondly, be a European-wide anti-poverty or poverty relief policy, which mandates member states to define a poverty line under which no European citizen should be allowed to fall by his or her government of the member state. A third possibility would be, and that is my favorite, although I have not managed to find much support among policy makers, but that may come. You know what a Gini coefficient is. A Gini coefficient is a measure of social inequality. It takes the value of 1. If all the income in a particular group goes to one person, and it has the value of 0 if absolutely equal income distribution prevails. So it's an easy measure of social inequality. And we know that the richer economies are, the lower, that is, the more equal the income distribution tends to be. So why don't we adopt a European legislation of the following nature? If you are, for instance, as rich in terms of GDP per capita as the Netherlands are, then you are not allowed to exceed your Gini coefficient to exceed 0.29. If you are as poor as Bulgaria presently is, you may be allowed, until you get richer, a Gini of 0.34. We know in Europe how to legislate the content of dirt in the air, right? Why don't we manage to define a Gini along these lines? But the serious proposal that is on the table is, of course, a proposal of debt mutualization. You can call it Eurobonds, you can call it extension of the time limit of the debt. Whatever you call it, it will mean a massive redistribution in two dimensions, namely the dimensions from state to state and from class to class. What we have, and then I finish, in the present situation, is a massive deterioration of the social conditions of large parts of the population, and I do not have to tell you, speaking to a Spanish or Catalan audience, what the situation is. A new phenomenon in Euro statistics is the category of needs. It's called not need, but needs. And that acronym stands for people not in employment, education, or training. That is, people without an access to labor market and therefore to no other markets, right? Young people who are simply excluded from the institutions, be it institutions of training, be it labor market institution. And if you look at the age between 15 and 24, that is the hot spot where this problem occurs, you get figures between 20 and 25% for many of the countries of the periphery. So we are speaking of a lost generation, people excluded from the labor market. I can give you any number of data. I brought a few tables on the social situation, unemployment, long-time unemployment, wage decline, involuntary part-time work, and in particular the spread of the income distribution between the upper fifths and the lower fifths. It used to be a factor of 5, now it's becoming a factor of 7. It is a wide open question whether economic growth can at all help us to overcome this situation, whether economic growth, suppose it is possible to stage, will actually improve the distributional situation, the situation of poverty and marginalization or precarious labor conditions. If growth can do the job, no one knows how to do growth, how to restore growth. The economic doctrines that are recommended are diametrically opposed to each other. There are neo-Keynesians, there are market liberals, and they have economic knowledge is simply not reliable. We are facing a depression in Europe. Growth is not the panacea, the remedy that we can acquire, supposing it is leading to a situation of approximating full employment. And this precariousness and polarization is likely to generate political forces that are not Europe-friendly, but belong in the lower left corner of my little 2x2 matrix that I introduced at the beginning, namely, it is likely to strengthen the forces of nationalist, anti-European, anti-liberal populism that we see rising in many countries. So, who wants to defend European integration is compelled to do something about social justice in order to strengthen the political forces that stick to the goals of European integration that Mrs. Hase has mentioned at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claus Offe, for this thorough analysis and appeal towards enhancing political capacity in current Europe. I pass the word immediately on to Bostrad.
Is it on?
Yes. No.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will approach this problem from the conceptual side. And my argument tonight is that the ongoing crisis in Europe is more than a Euro crisis. It is a conceptual crisis because we do not have any language and an adequate economic theory to describe and conceptualize what is happening. The best example is, I think, the market. The market has been a key concept since the 1990s. It has become the major threat to the European integration. The European leaders are all, for the moment, involved in an existential struggle on life and death against the market with capital M. They mobilize trillions of euro to build firewalls against the market. Firewalls, firepower, bazookas were key concepts which emerged in a new language describing a struggle between the euro and the market a year ago. The euro used to be seen as the child of the market. The shift from friend to enemy has been very fast, but there has been no real debate about it. It has just happened. Another concept which has totally changed meaning, but a little bit slowly, is reform. It used to be a social reform. Reform as a social reform was a key concept in the long-term struggle about taming and controlling capitalist economies, long struggles for democracy in the whole 19th century. It was a concept in the therapy of the working class waiting for the promised revolution, but also for political elites to integrate the class protest. Today, the reform has eliminated all links to the social. It is exclusively a term that propagates economic efficiency. Reform means social downgrading. Unemployment is a concept to think of in this reform compact. It was invented in the 1880s. It was then, for the first time, observed that the fact that people didn't have employment was not necessarily their own guilt, their own responsibility. There was a problem in the system as it works. There was a systemic responsibility to take care of. And here, to describe this phenomenon, unemployment was invented. It meant that the political responsibility to correct market failures were established. Unemployment at the end meant certain social standards. Like employment, employment also developed certain social standards. Today, the solution to unemployment is employment without minimum standards. this is the instrument to polish the labor market statistics. And I think this is one of these many silent developments where everything has changed and the language makes a U-turn. Other concepts are freedom. It used traditionally in the French Revolution. It was linked to the other two honorary concepts in the revolution, equality and solidarity. And today, I think it has again been a concept to express the right of the strong to do whatever they want. Government became governance without much reflection. Why governance suddenly was a better word. The term governance was first coined by the World Bank in the 1980s. In order to promote more transparent and anti-corruptive politics in the developing countries. Their government connoted corrupt state apparatuses and appalling resource management. The World Bank localized good governance in the civil society, where market and civil society, as opposed to the Keynesian link between market and state, triggered mutually reinforcing dynamics. At the beginning of the 1990s, books, articles, and pamphlets about good governance grew exponentially, hand in hand with another new buzzword, globalization, and these two concepts reinforced one another. From governance as a concept in a civilizing mission against corruption in the third world, it bounced back to the West as a term to support the new market language. The backdrop of the change from state to market as semantic icons was the declining legitimacy for so-called Keynesian welfare politics in the 1980s. The decline meant a conceptual shift from state to the market as heuristic points of reference. State began to connote negative, market positive values. Governance was linked to new market-oriented notions of democracy, supported by other key concepts like flexibility and the non-hierarchical term network. Up to then, the state had been the point of reference for democracy, although increasingly questioned since the 1980s, and citizenship had acquired a social dimension which now went lost. A new language emerged from a new interpretive framework emerged, a new strong ideology emerged. The aim and the achievement of this shift of language was the separation of the political and the economic, the separation of the social and the economic. Economy and market was a separate category, a self-propelling machine which didn't need any social embedding. So the argument in this conceptual transformation. The major economic thinker since 1930s until the 1970s, John Maynard Keynes, his major achievement had been to bring these dimensions together, the social, the political, and the economic, and now they split up. The conclusion from this historical development is that there is a need for a new political socio-economic theory that brings the political, the social, and the economic together again. The market is not that self-propelling machine it argues to be. Until the 1970s, there was a theory which described how politics could manage and manipulate economic variables like inflation, employment levels, growth rates, and so on. And this was a theory initiated by Keynes for the industrial full employment economies of growth in northwestern Europe. And it is probably impossible to translate it as it was to today's post-industrial global world, where growth is generated from finance products and trade with debts, rather than production and trade with commodities. Even if not valid today, I think the confidence in the political management of markets must be re-established. Market, as I said, is not self-propelling. The argument is that we need an ideology that reappropriates this connection between the social, the economic, and the political. There was a Hungarian economic historian who, in American exile, reflected on how it could come to the Great Depression in the 1930s. He reflected on this problem in a long historical perspective. And he published a book in 1944, which became a classic. The Great Transformation was the name of the book, and the name of the Hungarian economic historian is Karl Polanyi. He described a permanent struggle between the social and political and economic forces. Economic forces continuously tried to get rid of the straitjacket that political rules have imposed upon them. They disembedded themselves from their political and social embedment. These were the terms used by Polanyi. This, I think, is still a very relevant way to understand our own situation today. I think we are experiencing an accelerating disembedment of economic forces since the 1980s, and what is happening right now is not easy to understand if it will continue or if it is uninterrupted and what will come instead of it. Might be a new political embedding, but we don't know. Historical philosopher Reinhard Koselleck, one of the great thinkers of the 20th century, saw the dynamics between social critique and crisis as the motor of modernity. With the beginning in the Enlightenment philosophy, critique of the social conditions brought experiences of political crisis. The French Revolution was the case in point. Those in power have to respond to the critique and establish new stability. But this only means a temporary solution, since new groups are unsatisfied, emerge, and pronounce new critique. And so the development continues under the term progress. The intellectual tool of the critics was and is the translation of the experiences into new horizons of expectation, to re-embed the economic forces which have disembedded themselves. The critique is future-oriented and opens up new horizons of action where the old ones do not mobilize anymore. The sequence of critique and crisis makes the future open. The suggestions and opportunities of action go in many different directions. The question is now, what has happened to Koselleck's critique crisis scenario? Where is the critique? Where are the outlines of new horizons of action drawn from past experiences? Koselleck identified one big problem. The gap between experiences and expectations is getting ever smaller. The gap is about to close down. The purpose of the critique was to open up this case, to open up new horizons, translating experience into new visions. But this is exactly where we are stuck in a problem. Why is it so we can only speculate about? The disappointments are coming tighter, which makes it ever more difficult to raise new horizons. the enormous accumulation of information through the electronic revolution makes the experiences so overwhelming and so momentous that they have difficulty to translate themselves into new expectations. The decreasing gap means growing resignation of, or apathy as to the future and as to the beliefs in the representative democratic order, or wrath and rage without capacity to canalize the feelings in constructive future-oriented projects. In earlier similar situations of experiences of a closing gap with a decreasing capacity to discern a viable future, attempts have been made to open up the gap again through apocalyptic imageries of a different future, be it the world revolution or the 1,000 years Reich. The present therapy, in order to keep the gap open, seems to be the return of nationalism. But what will come out of this development is very difficult to say. History doesn't give us much guidance. But in a pre-discussion here, Claus Offe called the process a proletarian nationalism, and I think this is a very interesting label for what is happening here, and this is a very dangerous situation, the proletarian capitalism, and if we nationalism, proletarian nationalism. And if we oppose this to what we see in the other end of the social spectrum, the new kind of cosmopolitan internationalism, the new Vaterlandslose Geselle of our time, so to speak, I think, and confront these two, I think we have a potentially difficult mix here. So, this was now the more historical framing of the situation today. What solutions are there? First, I must just reserve here, I see my task as an intellectual more to get the questions right than to answer them. I think there are too many who just are giving answers today, and we need more basic questions. We need to lean back and think what is the situation about. But of course, any question has a certain bearing on some form of answer, so my too. Let me then come into the debate. Klaus mentioned them, Jürgen Habermas and Wolfgang Streeck, the debate between them, which is going on. Wolfgang Streeck had a new response reply to Habermas in the September issue of Blätter, I think. And I think they shed very much light on the dilemma in which we are. Streeck is convincing in his analysis of the economic development. A monetary union without common fiscal politics and without possibility to adjust the exchange rates to the economic productivity or labor cost unit, as was the case with national currencies, can only end in a collapse in an area with so great productivity differences as in Europe. This was the point that the liberal German sociologist and politician Ralph Dahrendorf made already in 1995. The austerity therapy today is an attempt to re-establish the conditions of the gold standard and will fail like the gold standard did. The prevailing conflict deals with how much sovereignty the southern countries should lose and how much financial support they should get from the northern countries. This is how Wolfgang Streeck defines the problem. In the first case, the growing loss of sovereignty is seen as too high in the south and too low in the north. In the case of the finance packages, they are the other way around, seen as too high in the north and too low in the south. These oppositions have split Europe in north and south, and ever stronger nationalism supports a renationalization and a parallel de-Europeanization of Europe. The key issue at stake in the debate between Habermas and Streeck is whether a European democracy worth the name can be a solution to this development. Stråth does, on principle, not reject the possibility, but doubts its realism. It would require such a large institutional reform that it is difficult to see who would be able to initiate and drive it through. It would require a European Parliament with majority decisions about equalization of Europe through financial transfers. It would require a debt union, it would require a totally new constitution, and it would also require a parliament with European parties worth the name. A problem is that those who need and want the money would form the majority, and those who have the money the minority. This situation would make the overall legitimacy of the European Parliament extremely difficult, and the risk would be permanent that the political struggle and the mobilization is again driven back to the national parliaments. Habermas sees a stronger European democracy, nevertheless, through a stronger European Parliament, but has maybe not reflected as much on the economic preconditions as Stråth has done. Without a change of economic approach and a shift of economic paradigm, it is difficult to see a European solution. My argument against the backdrop of this debate between Stråth and Habermas is that the crisis which has led to a social and moral as well as political crisis is thus much more than an economic crisis. All these dimensions of the crisis must be considered and integrated in the solution. A new conceptual framework, a new economic theory. An institutional and constitutional reform with an upgrading of the European Parliament would not be enough. There is an urgent need for a new economic paradigm with a reintegration of the social dimension in any discussion of economic efficiency. And here I think the problem is that the economists have abandoned us. They were the big parade discipline from the 1990s until quite recently, but now we don't hear very much. Concepts like freedom, reform, market, and state must be reappropriated from the usage it has got now. They must again get a social connection. In the lack of a viable alternative to the neoliberal efficiency and reform language, we only have historical experience and models to refer to. A European Keynesian approach with something like a well-organized Marshall Plan as a starting point, and a European monetary, fiscal, and social policy decided through political confrontation in its political center, the European Parliament, seems to be the only possibility to take Europe out of the development which is going on, if not competing nationalists will do. The new force must come from the European Parliament, so I think, not only through an institutional form, but also a political, accompanied by conceptual innovation and a new language supported by a new economic theory. The European Parliament must be the forum for a project about the social Europe. The disembedding of the market forces, to use Polanyi's metaphor, strong metaphor, must be met with the political re-embedding. And the architecture of this new regulation must be designed through political contention and debate in the European Parliament. There is no other forum for this necessary step towards a new Europe. Of course, this will not happen just by the European Parliament getting together and talking about more social and the importance of more social. It must be a clash of values and clash of arguments in the Parliament. Only through a clash between Keynesian and Hayekian, between social democratic, social liberal, and neoliberal models can a new approach be molded together. The conflict molds together societies and create values. This is my point. Finally, how realistic is such a solution? And this is another question. Is this difficult to see any political force for such a development? right now. It is improbable that such a proposal for a solution of the European crisis gains a political hearing. But it is exactly therefore that one on intellectual grounds must insist on its necessity.
Thank you very much for Stråth.